politics is not only for politicians. You know, in every corporation you have, whether there's 2 people or 2,000 people, there's politics going on. Politics is about the interaction between people. Now, it's not a bad thing, but we construe it as a bad thing because only the bad things ever get published or printed or talked about. So politics, pay attention, it's human interaction and its influence for somebody trying to gain, and the perception is at the expense of others. Sometimes if you do it right, you can both gain by it and the organization. So pay attention to how it can be effective for you to achieve the goals of the organization. There's negative consequences sometimes that are not beneficial for anybody. It's just negative things that happen and results in different types of wars that offend people. So minimizing it, you really want to, because you want to really have a true, honest to goodness organization chart that does things. Provide resources for everybody so people are not trying to work around the system. Clarify the rules. Probably one of the biggest fights you're ever going to have is resource allocation. I need more money for my department. Well, I need it too, and I got more power than you. You do so far, and I'll take care of that next week. And you have wars going on over resources. I worked in a 5-college district. We had 5 colleges, and all the presidents and the chief business officers felt their college is the most important. Yes, including me, including my boss. Yes, that's how we did it. One time I found another college, they were cheating. The guy sat down, he pretended he's Mr. Joe Honesty, except I found out where he was hiding his money. He had 12 faculty members that had retired 5 years before, and he was still pretending we were paying him. So yes, I found it and I removed it and I moved it into my budget. Yes, except I was more honest about it than he was. I wasn't faking it. I just said, okay, you're misallocating this, so now we're going to go and be fair to everybody. So by the time you're all done, try to minimize that. Manage change effectively. Change, people will fight it. We'll talk about change later on. People automatically fight change because it's different. Discourage political behavior, try to be upfront as possible, whatever you can, but no matter what happens, as long as there's human beings, you have problems with this. Here's an interesting article. I encourage you to read the whole thing from the Harvard Business Review called The 4 Types of Organizational Politics. Okay, Michael Wood, Jarrett, he talks about the woods, the high ground, the weeds, and the rocks, 4 different areas, and about the source of power and the informal versus the formal, a little bit like the soft type and the hard type. So let's look at them. Each of the 4 quadrants has 2 dimensions of the amount of political activity, and if you use soft skills or the informal, and the hard skills or the formal. Okay, the weeds. First of all, personal influence and informal networks rule. So you have power, but this is the lowest quadrant of the whole thing of power, and it's very informal. But the problem is, if it goes unchecked, just like the weeds, the weeds can choke out all the good things there, and they can thwart the legitimate change efforts. So pay attention to the weeds. I encourage you to use the weeds because it's informal, and a lot of times you get a lot of things happening on the informal basis instead of the formal, because as soon as you get into the formal, it becomes harder and rules and authority apply. Here, this is referent power, by far the most effective. Now you have the rocks where power rests on individuals, and formal. So formal is hard. So I'm in charge. We're going to do this. I'm going to put you between a rock and a hard place, and I am the rock. Yes, they symbolize stabilizing the foundation to keep the place steady in crisis, but also rocks have hard edges and they can wreck a plan. So try not to use the hard way of doing it if you can. A lot of times you have to, though, because you need to get things done. And sometimes this is the one that really helps you to get it done by pushing things through. But you have to always go back to the informal to temper this a little bit. The woods, okay, they have implicit norms, different assumptions, unspoken routines. They can provide cover and safety sometimes, and they can be a bewildering place because people don't know where they're at or how to find their way. And that's where you can have in the process and the system. This is soft again, but sometimes you hide people in the jargon of their profession so people can't find them, whoever they are. Long as you know what's going on, this is a place of safety you can have for some of the employees. Just put them out of sight for a while. The high ground is formal, And it really describes the rules, structure, and policy guidelines. If you create the rules, you have to make certain that you have the ability to bend them for the exception, because almost all the time people will create exceptions to the rules and you may have to modify them. And part of the wisdom of experience and leadership is knowing when to take a rule and how to enforce it, and when at times you have to make the exception. That really comes from years of practice and experience in the process, because every time you make an exception, you're going to have people coming back for the next 3, 5, 7, 10 years. I remember when you bent that rule for so-and-so because he was a favorite. No, it wasn't a favor. It was because the son was in jail in a foreign country. We had to sit there and make an exception to the policy. But you made an exception. So be careful every time you make an exception. There's somebody will always remember that. So the high ground, once again, use the structures and be careful about making them too rigid, because if you make an exception to a too rigid structure, people will always remember. So here's the for politics. I encourage you to read this article about the woods, the high ground, the weeds and the rocks, and the differences. But you'll see again here, soft versus hard skills as to what you're using in the process. The soft carries a lot more weight, and people appreciate it much more than the hard that comes with the harshness. Politics, use both your hard and soft skills, learn the soft skills, learn the hard skills, and every organization has more than one person and has some level of politics because there's more than one person. Politics is not only for politicians, it's for those people that work for a living in any type of organization. So politics, not only for politicians. Take care.